This is how to make dance pants. You'll need 2 yards of stretch fabric, yardstick, pin, white packaging paper, pin, scissors, measuring tape, sewing machine. If you wear a size 16 or up, you'll need to get into the 3 to 4 yards to make it. So let's get started with our measurements. This shows you a diagram of where those measurements are. Go ahead and measure yourself and put them in, and then put them in the chart above. Do your math, and then that should tell you what numbers you're going to use for the different areas of your pattern. So this should be helpful as to how to do that. So let's get started. You'll need your packaging paper, yardstick, and your scissors. Starting with the inseam, I use the straight edge of the packaging paper because it's straight. Then I start doing the crotch seam, and I typically go 3 inches in because mine was 13 inches, and then I do the rest of it there, and then I add a curvature in there. Then the next thing I do is take a measurement of what it was from my crotch to my knee and make a mark, and then I go from that mark into whatever my knee measurement was. I believe it was 9 inches. And then I go and I do my hip measurement from the top marking of the top crotch area, and then just before the curvature I do the butt area measurement, and then I go down in the middle between the crotch area and the knee and I do my thigh measurement. I tend to go a little higher up, and then I go in and I bring all those dots together, connect the dots, but try to make it as smooth as possible. Really nice gradual smooth line between those 3 measurements. Next, you can choose if you want a large fishtail, small fishtail. Just make your dot and connect from the knee to that dot back to the bottom of the inseam measurement. You've got your pattern, and I add a curve to the top of the hip area because of its being stretch fabric. You shouldn't have to add an elastic waistband, so all you need to do now is cut it out. But I also add in a front and a back area so that you only have to cut out one pattern, and I do an inch difference from that, and then I add an inch when I do the back, because the back, if you have a larger butt area, you want to add inches past. And so this is what your pattern should look like. And this is about 2 yards of fabric laid out nice and smooth. Make sure there's no bunching. And then this is pretty much what your pattern is going to look like together on, but you're only going to use one pattern piece. So go ahead and start pinning in your pattern. Make sure that you don't have any bunching whatsoever or stretching, because if you do, you'll have odd places show up when you're sewing. It can be very tedious sewing with stretch fabric, so be very careful. But go ahead and cut out, and cut very tight to where the edge of the pattern is, because you're going to use every last little bit of fabric. So you need to make sure that you keep that area as much clean as possible, and you'll see why. So this is your front. So you notice that I've done the inch in, and you'll see that there's extra paper there showing, and that's the front. And because I cut it on a fold, I'm going to cut that in nice and neatly and make 2 pieces rather than it being one connected piece. And this is typical. This is how I don't waste any fabric. Next, you want to pin in your back. You don't need to remove your front, you just pin in over the top. Try to make sure you don't stretch or bunch your fabric. And you see how tight of a fit. This is a size 16 pair of pants. So go ahead and pin it in. And I've extended it an extra inch, so it's actually extended 2 inches to allow room for the butt area. Go ahead and cut it out. I'm cutting the bottom first because I'm going to need to save this extra fabric to make a belt that ties in the front. Sometimes there's enough to actually make a small little skirt, but I'm going to do a belt with this pattern. Go ahead and cut your crotch and cut you a dart out. This tells you that it's the back, so that you don't have to go and measure out that there's more. You can just see it by looking at that dart. It just makes it easier. But you can see that you don't waste a lot of fabric here. It's using just about every last little bit of fabric, and that's good in these times of economy where, you know, every last little bit of anything counts. And so there you go. You see that your bottom is more than your top, and that you see there's a dart for the bottom and not for the top. This is what it should look like all cut out. And then we're going to do the waistband. I do a 6-inch waistband tie front, and so I measure 6 inches all the way across. And then I go on top of that measurement and measure 6 more inches, because you'll need 2 bands to make sure that it's long enough to do wrap around the hips and do a tie in the front. So I cut that, I connect the lines that I made, and to make sure that I've got 2 6-inch bands. And so I neatly and carefully do this. And make sure that you don't have any bunching and that you do a nice smooth cut. It's very important. It makes sewing with stretch fabric much easier. Okay, let's get started sewing it together. You're going to do the back crotch first, where your dart is. Make sure that your positives are facing each other and that the negatives are facing out. And then you want to put it in the machine. And I do the second line in, but the third line in I do believe would be 5/8 of an inch. You can do 5/8 of an inch. It's easier when it's actually marked out how many, what the measurement is, but I usually do the second line in. I do a reverse to actually set in the seam. It's important so that you don't have unravel. And go ahead and sew it all the way down. It should line up really nice because you cut it out at the same time. But be careful, don't push or pull the fabric. If you do, you will have weird spots that show up that looked pulled, that it doesn't fit right, it doesn't look right. So make sure you don't push or pull, and make sure you reverse the end of it so that you don't have unraveling. And that's what it should look like, and you want to do this exact same thing for the front, so that won't be too hard. Just flip it, make sure your positives are facing each other and your negatives are on the outside. So here they are sewn together, and you want to take the severe curved part at the bottom, and you want to take the front and the back of that section, and you want to put them together. Remember, positives facing each other, negatives facing out, and you want to pin those seams together so that they match up real close. And then you want to start from that center crotch seam, and you want to sew from that seam out down to the bottom of the leg of the pants, and then you want to go back and sew the other leg. And that way it's even on both sides and you don't have your crotch lines off. Just go ahead and put it in the machine. You can go ahead and take the pin out and go from there. Make sure you still reverse because you want to set this seam in. It's important. You know how you get a pair of pants and there's a hole that shows up right there. That's why it's important to go ahead and still reverse. That makes that area stronger and less likely to start showing holes. So go ahead and do it all the way to the end of the pant. And then go back and go from the center again and do the other side. And so this is what it should look like with the inseam sewn and the crotch seam sewn laid out on the floor. So we have our crotch seam done and our inseam, and now we're wanting to do from the knee all the way to the top, so our side seams, to finish doing the pants so they look like pants. So you want to reverse it and do your positive sides facing each other and your negative sides facing out. You want to start where the knee is and move to the top where the hip area is. Make sure you do not pull or push the fabric so that you don't have weird spots showing up in your seams, and it lays nice and beautifully on the body when you wear the garment. Great thing about this pattern is it does actually go very fast once you have your pattern set out and you have it all lined up the way you like. It goes really fast. Make sure you reverse, set that seam in, and you want to do the other side just the exact same way. And so the bottom should be open just like this. There's your fishtail. And then they should be nice and fitted through the thigh area and the hip area. And then all that's left is the waistband. You can choose, if you don't want to do the tie front and you feel more comfortable, you can fold it down and add elastic and send elastic through. But we're going to work on a tie front that folds down and ties front and adds a little flavor to the top. And so this is basically what the pants should look like so far. So let's do the waistband. Alright, you want to take your two bands that you cut out and you want to sew one end and the other end together to make one big long sash. And that's fairly simple. Positive sides together, negative sides facing out, always remember. And go ahead and sew that up. A real easy, simple seam, and make sure you still reverse. You don't want the seam to come undone. And now you want to pin the band into the pants, and this is going to be a little weird. You're going to have your positive facing your negative, and then the negative of the band's going to face out. And if you want to make sure that it's right, you want to fold it back like this, and if you see that the positive and the positive are showing, it's fine. That's how you know you've got it right. Always make sure you do that. That's just easier than seam ripping. So go ahead and pin the band into the waist, and you want to know where your front is. That's important, because if you sew past your front, you're going to have a weird tie front area. It's not going to look right. And because this is a waistband, I tend to use a zigzag so that it allows stretch rather than a straight seam. And the settings I typically use are a 4 to 5, so that you have a wide setting, but you want the wide setting close together, and so that way it's closed like a seam, but it allows room for stretch. And I find this makes it a lot easier. So I go in and I add the zigzag all the way around from the back center to the front, and then I go back and do the back center to the front again, and it keeps those two back seams connected so that when you put the pants on, they line up. Now typically with every seam that I do, but I use a serger, and or you can choose to zigzag since you only have a machine. It's up to you. I usually do all my edges with a serger. It gives a nice professional, like, factory look. And doing a fold down hem is very difficult. So I finished sewing it in, and this is what you should have after you fold it down. And this is going to be your front tie, as you can see, and there's the front and the space between. But as I said, serger makes it easier to do your edges, or you can choose to zigzag. If you choose to fold it down, that does tend to get complicated when sewing it and doing a nice professional clean look. But here are the pants. I hope you like your pants, and I hope you take advantage of the fact that this is cheaper and affordable for those ladies who are bigger in size and have a harder time getting these kinds of pants. So let's see how they move.